Our next speaker is Christina Staiger, and her talk is entitled "An iBridges Update: How easy can we make it for scientists to use iRODS?"
Yes, thank you very much. I introduced iBridges 2 years ago as a little client for graphical interactions for users and iRODS. And since then, some things have changed. What has not changed is what we would like to reach. We would like to enable researchers to collaborate on their data, minimizing data uploads and downloads to and from different kinds of infrastructure, and by that also keeping data or copies of data at a minimum, because that usually creates a lot of chaos. So iBridges evolved a little bit. We've separated the part of the API from the graphical user interface. So there is right now an iBridges Python API, which is targeting researchers who do programming. We have a command line interface, and the greatest is we have also a shell with auto-completion. And we have, again, the graphical user interface. And we are still targeting researchers of all backgrounds. So we really try to account for also for researchers who do not have such big technical expertise to really the ones who do programming and scientific programming. We focus on these 4 use cases. I'm a researcher and I want to interactively explore my data in iRODS. I'm a researcher and I need to pull in a subset of my data into my compute workflow. And my 2 colleagues, Martin and Raoul, will show you 2 use cases in the next talk. The third one is I'm a lab technician. My equipment produces a lot of data which I need to upload to iRODS from, example, Windows machines. And I'm a data manager and I need to monitor the inflow of data from people or equipment. Just for you an oversight, this is how we place the iBridges API. It draws on the Python iRODS client. So you could say this is a lot of syntactic sugar and icing on top of the Python iRODS client to make it easier for researchers to interact with iRODS. We made 3 main classes: data operations with upload, data, and synchronization functions. We introduced a class called iRODS path, for where we draw from also pathlib like functionality for an iRODS path, and we have the permissions. And as you can see, since an iBridges session is basically using a Python iRODS client session, you can always combine these 3 major blocks with anything that the Python iRODS client offers. So here are the highlights from the past year. As I said, we have an iBridges shell right now with tab completion for iRODS paths, local paths, and commands. And we worked a little bit more on the iBridges API. So there is right now the iRODS path class. Actually, that was already there last year, but we improved a lot on that. The metadata is right now directly accessible from the iRODS path. So there's no need to first create a path and then go to an object and then access the metadata. That all comes from the iRODS path. And to make it easier to work with metadata, we made setters for key, value, and units. We also include the metadata in our data transfer, so you can upload, download, and synchronize right now collections and data objects with metadata. And something that some of our data managers really like a lot, you can stream data objects right now by the iRODS path. We improved a little bit on the search, and we introduced the notion of a current working directory. So from the iRODS path, you have anyways the home, which is set for you. But we extended that also with the current working directory, mainly for the API and the command line interface. Then, of course, everything that we did in the API gets translated to the command line interface and also to the GUI. But for the command line interface, we added aliasing, mainly because also we as research engineers, we have access to a lot of iRODS instances and we usually got confused. So we thought we deserve an aliasing for iRODS environment files. On the GUI side, we moved from PyQt to PySite to allow for a more permissive license. And we build executables that come right now with our software releases, and we offer scripts to build executables. The last thing that we try to do is we try to move again the iBridges command line interface and the graphical user interface together so that they draw on the same configurations. So we include the aliases from the command line interface also in the graphical user interface. And you can call right now also the graphical user interface from the command line interface. Next to that, to really ease the use of data in iRODS for our researchers, we really made a lot of documentation. We have tons of examples and tutorials. A big highlight, maybe more for you, is we created plugins for iBridges. I will skip right now the iRODS server templates. There is an extra slide to that. But you can plug in right now customized views in the graphical user interface. So this is how it appears here. You will get an extra tab and you can design how this tab should look. It gets an iBridges session and then you go ahead, design it and design also the functionality. The same we did for the command line interface. You can plug in commands. And this is then how it appears here. So the info is one of our example plugins. iBridges just recognizes an installed plugin and shows it. In our Git repositories, you can find examples from which you can just copy paste and then make your own plugins. That brings me to how do we make it right now easy for researchers to use iRODS. And the first challenge that users usually encounter is the first time login, the setup of the iRODS environment JSON, where you need to watch out you have all keywords defined in the correct way, you store the file in the correct folder, and it is stored really as a JSON and not accidentally as a TXT file. And that brings me to the third plugin that we made, and that is a plugin for server templates. You can define basically how the iRODS environment JSON should look like and define questions that should be asked to the user to gather the information that is specific for a user or for a project. And you see here an example how it shows up. We have several iRODS instances at Utrecht University, and we made such a plugin for our own iRODS instances. You can, once this plugin is installed, you can list it in the command line interface. You use iBridges setup and then the iRODS instance you would like to connect to. And in our case, you're just asked for your email address because that's your login name. And you see here the equivalent of the graphical user interface where you get pointed and that you need to still fill in your username. The second challenge is more a challenge for research supporters like us. When you have access to several iRODS instances, you would like to have a short name to access these iRODS instances. And you see here, by default, you have a default alias, which points to the normal iRODS environment JSON. But you can easily create a new one. Here I'm creating a new one to another iRODS instance hosted at Surf. It is listed and you can just init with the alias name. Same for the graphical user interface. There you have a drop-down menu of all of your iRODS environment JSONs in the .iRODS folder, and those who carry an alias will be prefixed with the alias. The next thing were iRODS paths. I saw quite some code dealing in Python with strings and doing string operations, and I myself also suffered a lot from transferring data from iRODS to a Windows machine where you have different separators for the paths. And that led us to create two new classes, the iRODS path and the cached iRODS path. Both of these classes contain functionality like the pathlib-like functionality, like join paths, parents, parts, relative to. They both understand the shortcuts for the home and the current working directory. And we also put iRODS metadata underneath of the iRODS path, which is size checksum metadata. And in case of the cached iRODS path, it's the size checksum and metadata at the time when you create the instance. And you can also do the streaming now directly from the iRODS path, and that shortens code significantly. This is a small example. You see here I'm importing the interactive authentication, the iRODS path. I create a session. I create a collection path, and you see here from the session, the iRODS path automatically picks up your home directory and extends it with anything that you put as a suffix in there. You can get the cumulative collection path size from this little collection called My Books. And if I right now want to go deeper into the into the collection, I can use the pathlib-like syntax and extend the path. And this is the example how I can also view the metadata associated with that text file. Coming to metadata manipulation, something that was always a little bit cumbersome is if you made a mistake in creating a metadata entry, and then you did a typo, for example, in the key or in the values on the units. So we created some extra metadata syntactic sugar. Here again, we have the collection, My Books. We can print all of the metadata. Something that is really hard sometimes to understand for researchers is that a metadata key does not necessarily need to be unique in an iRODS system. But when they see the find all function, they can understand that much easier and also work with that. Another way to retrieve a metadata entry is simply by using the metadata and using the key. And if the key is unique, you will get the metadata item. And here you see an example how you can easily adjust a metadata item value. In the uppercase, I forgot to have an underscore. I won't like to have an underscore, so I can easily overwrite. The challenge number 5 is up and downloading, respecting the full data object, so including the metadata. In the graphical user interface, so for now, we just implemented the download of metadata as a metadata JSON. In the command line interface, all 3 data operations, upload, download, and synchronization, carry a metadata tag. So you have the synchronization. I have my books downloaded. I want to upload the whole collection with the metadata again to iRODS into a new collection. I give the tag or the flag metadata with it, and then I have to specify the JSON document. And you see that the metadata will be attached to the right collections and data objects. What we try to do with this JSON is we try to minimize the nestedness because we want to make it fit for researchers to use in computational algorithms. So if there's a lot of nestedness, you need to search where you find it, and then you have to write again a lot of code to access the metadata. So for now, we try to keep it as flat as possible. Every entry in there has the relative path to the iRODS root collection for which you created the metadata. It contains the checksum in case of data objects, the name, the iRODS identifier, and a list of metadata key value unit triples. And this is how it looks right now. So you see here, this is the root path in the iRODS instance. And then you have here all the items that were downloaded. The first one is, of course, the root collection, My Books. And the other documents in that collection carry the relative path, data object, SHA, and then again, a list of metadata items. The last challenge was searching for data, and I'm sure many of you have encountered that when you want to search for a path pattern, which we have here, object or collection name, and you have slashes in there, it's hard to distribute that over the collection path and the data object name. So basically that boils down to how iRODS collection names and object names are stored. So we made basically 3 queries, one for the collections, one for the data objects to filter on the collection path and one for the data objects filtering on the data name. And if you have slashes in your search term, then the last part will always be mapped to the data name. Our users are researchers at Utrecht University. We have a national facility, the Netherlands Plant Eco-Phenotyping Center, who are using the graphical user interface to ingest large amounts of data to iRODS. We have, I think it's an EU project, Unlock, which teaches their users to work with iBridges when they want to access the data in their iRODS instance. And we have the Expanse project, which is an international EU project. And they are collecting a lot of data at Utrecht University in an iRODS instance, and they give access to their external partners through iBridges. And there I've seen that they're using the command line interface and the graphical user interface. But when I look at the PyPy stats, we see that there might be more users. So we would like to get in touch with you. If you're a user or if you know users, please make them aware. We have our first iBridges user meeting on November 27th. It would be great to meet you all there. And with that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Do we have any questions from the room?
Okay, question. If I have Federation set up in another zone, can I use iBridges to access collections in that zone through Federation, or do I have to set up that instance of iRODS separately?
Now I've tested that. It works also in federations because the iRODS path just changes. You have to then start all of your paths that you use with a new zone name, and then it will work just like that. It will be difficult then to use, of course, the home and the current working directory. I think the current working directory will work, but the home is then, of course, your home zone path.
All right. So I got a question. How do you know, are there users who prefer using the programming interface provided by iBridges as compared to the GUI?
These are, in what I see, very different user groups. The GUI is mainly used by Windows users and by less technical people. What we see from our data stewards is that they mainly use the command line interface and the API. But yeah, for quick checks, also seasoned developers like to have the graphical user interface and just quickly look at something.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you, Christina.